Okay, we're going to look at the main elements of life and biogeochemical cycles. So when you looked at carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, we saw from the amoeba sisters the CHO, CHON, CHOMP, and the main elements of the four macros. But now we're going to just expand this a little bit and look at the six main elements that you're going to find most commonly in organisms. So carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And a lot of times you'll see it written as this CHNOPS, as a memory device or a way to remember it. Now, the biogeochemical cycles is technically something that we would cover in ecology, but I think it kind of makes sense to talk about it now, to talk about where you're going to find these elements in the environment, in our surroundings. So carbon is very important to organisms. A lot of times you'll hear us referred to as carbon-based organisms, and that's because carbon itself can form four covalent bonds with atoms. Those could be carbon atoms, or it could be atoms of different elements. And we can see in the three examples here of the different types of structures that you'll see in these molecules. We see a straight chain, and all of these little lines there represent bonds. We see a branch chain, and we see a ring. And when we look at them, I can see that carbon can bind to hydrogen, and carbon can also bind to oxygen. Now, the carbon-based molecules, and we've seen this word over and over again, carbon-based molecules like the carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids are made of smaller building blocks called monomers. And when you link the monomers together, we call them macros or macromolecules. Now, the example that you see here of this polymer, I know that this is some type of carbohydrate. And the reason that I know that this is a type of carbohydrate is that I can see the shape of the individual molecules that comprise this polymer. Now with this one, it looks like the polymer is made up of repeating subunits or repeating monomers. It doesn't have to be, they can be different. And something else, and you'll do more with this if you take chemistry next year, everywhere where you see a point on this ring structure, you can just go ahead and assume that there's a carbon there. If it's not carbon, then you'll see that element for that atom listed, like an H or an O. So the carbon-based molecules, we've gone through those, the carbs, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. And remember, this is CHO, CHO, CHON, CHOMP. So if you think about them this way, and this is the way that we covered them, carbs, then lipids, then proteins, then nucleic acids, then you're going to remember that CHO, CHO, CHON, CHOMP. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at each of these and where they are, what's their significance. So we'll start first with carbon, and then we'll move on to hydrogen and kind of oxygen together. We'll talk about the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and then really briefly on sulfur. So how are these elements important? If you're talking about carbon, you're talking about the chemical basis of most molecules. We're carbon based. Carbon is the backbone of all of these larger molecules. Now, what I want you to do with this is I want you to maybe pause what I'm saying and then click on this and watch this video about the carbon cycle. So how carbon is recycled in the environment. Our next, well, that's not kind of true. Our next unit is on cells, but after that we talk about energy. And when we talk about energy, we will talk a whole lot more about carbon. So how is carbon bounced around through the ecosystem? And you can see some of the processes here. Now these are called biogeochemical cycles, and if you think about a cycle, it means it's going to happen over and over and over and over again. But it's bio, so there's some biological component, a geological component. We can definitely see some earth, some soil. We see a mountain back there. And then chemical, there's going to be a chemical component. So we can see respiration. So respiration, we associate that word with breathing. So we're talking about an exchange of gases. And then we see decomposers, and decomposers, they conduct decomposition. All right, so take a look at that and then come back. So this cute little picture kind of summarizes what you just saw in that video. So if we were tracking a little carbon molecule named, or a carbon atom named Charlie, we could, but we're big kids now, and we're not going to do that. But the main reservoir for carbon itself is in the oceans, which is kind of weird to think about because you see this picture, and the big thing that sticks out to me in this picture is CO2. But technically, the main reservoir, the holding place for carbon, is in the oceans. And in general, not just with carbon, but with other gases like oxygen, cooler water holds more gases than warmer water. So you're going to find more aeration or more dissolved carbon dioxide or more dissolved oxygen in cooler waters. So something just to think about. Now, if I were starting here, I could start with combustion. So maybe in this little hobbit house or troll house, I don't know who lives there. They're burning some coal, so they're burning some something that has some compressed carbon in it from a long time ago. And what is released from that combustion is this carbon dioxide gas. And then this carbon dioxide gas is going to be absorbed by this tree here, and it's going to be used in the process of photosynthesis that we'll talk about in our energy chapter. And then this cow is going to eat the plants that have done photosynthesis, and so is this bird. So that is consumption, and then something called assimilation. So if I consume something, then it's going to go through my digestive system, and then it's going to assimilate. It's going to become a part of me. It's going to become a part of my tissues. And then how carbon gets kicked back into play are a couple different ways. One is through respiration. There is a process that occurs in organisms, even plants, but in this cow, and it converts the products of photosynthesis into usable energy. And a byproduct of that, a waste product of that, is carbon dioxide, which the cow is going to snort out through its little nose hairs, its nares. Other ways to get the carbon back into play could be through waste. So you can see this cow, little cow patty there, or it could be through decomposition. So you could see this is a cycle, so carbon is going to be kicked back into play, maybe by breathing or organisms decomposing or burning of fossil fuels. Maybe even some from things like weathering and erosion, and also from volcanic eruptions. So hydrogen is a component of water. So you could talk about hydrogen with the water cycle, which is something I tend to not spend too much time on because you've probably covered the water cycle before. And we're also going to see when we get into the complexities of the process of creating energy, harnessing it from the sun, and then transforming it into a form that can actually be used. Hydrogen plays a big part in that. But we're going to just move on to nitrogen. So nitrogen is a part of amino acids, which make proteins like your muscles. It's also a part of nucleotides, which make DNA and RNA. So if you will, please pause my video, and if you'll go and watch this video on the nitrogen cycle, and then come back. Now, if you look at this again, just like the carbon cycle, this summarizes what you saw in that video. This is very similar to the carbon cycle where you have consumption and then you have waste, but there's a little bit of a hiccup. Whereas carbon and carbon dioxide can be used directly by an organism, like those plants in photosynthesis. Nitrogen doesn't work that way. Nitrogen, and you can see it here, it's kind of blurry, but it's N3, so there's these triple bonds there that organisms like ourselves, we don't have the enzymes. We can't break those bonds. But there are some organisms that can, and those are special types of bacteria. They're called nitrogen fixing bacteria, and they live in the soil. They can either live at the root tips of certain types of plants called legumes, like peas or beans or clover, or they can be free living in the soil. But either way, they will take this nitrogen gas that has been aerated with the soil and they will transform it into a form that can be used. And you can kind of see this transformation process here. So we see going from ammonia, ammonium, and the only difference there, you can, again, it's blurry, sorry, the NH3 or the NH4, and then transforming into nitrites and then nitrates. And then this is what, when you get to this point, this is what the plants use. So when this happens, it's basically making a natural fertilizer for the plants. And as it become a part of the plant, again, it's going to assimilate. And then this, I'm assuming this is the elk, will eat that plant. And then the nitrogen becomes a part of the elk. And then the elk can go to the bathroom. Now, or decompose. Don't forget that one. It's so pleasant. But when it comes to the waste products here, we're talking more about number one instead of number two. We're talking about urine. Urine itself is a nitrogenous waste. And you've probably had the unpleasant experience to maybe go to some gas station when you're on vacation or and you have to go. You have to go. And the bathroom, you look at it, you're like, I don't even want to step in here. But you've got to go and it stinks. And what you could be smelling is this kind of smell. And you've probably had that experience, or maybe from a litter box, something like that. So it is nitrogenous waste. Now, something else that happens is, again, we've got to kick this back into play. And the main source here, we're going to start with the atmosphere. We're going to kick it back into play. There are also bacteria. Now, who would have thought the bacteria could be this helpful? But there are also bacteria in the soil that can take these nitrates and transform them back into nitrogen gas. So the process of taking the gas and making it useful is called nitrogen fixation. So you're fixing it from being an atmospheric gas into a molecule that these plants can use. And then there are some that can reverse that process, and they're called denitrifying bacteria. Now, one really kind of weird thing, I think it's weird. You see this rain. Rain is a way to get the nitrogen into the soil. And then you see this, lightning. Lightning is a way to get nitrogen from the atmosphere into the earth and fix it. So it also fixes it so it can be used. Now, you know, this is probably not a main source of nitrogen in the soil to be fertilizer for our plants. This longer process is, so the rain and then the bacteria fixing it. Okay, now with oxygen, oxygen is a component of water, so I thought I would throw in just a little bit of the water cycle here, just a wee bit. When it comes to oxygen, we all know that we have to have oxygen to survive. In this class, we're going to learn why. Why do you have to have oxygen? Why does oxygen keep you alive? Why, if you don't have oxygen, are you not going to make it? And we're going to see that oxygen is a big time player in the process of energy production. Big time. Got to have it. Got to have it to make energy. And if you have energy, you live. If you don't have energy, you know what's going to happen. So after your video, if you look here, you can see the movement of water around. And the big thing I wanted us to focus on in this class is this, transpiration. So we could see evaporation coming from the water, coming from this liquid to this gaseous state. Well, that also can happen from the leaves of plants. So instead of just calling it evaporation from the leaves of plants, it's called transpiration.